Hi. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the way kind of programs are set up. No, there's a lot of talk about needs. Um, so like when we talk about humanitarian interventions, we talk about okay, the first step being the needs assessment, where teams of different people go off and assess needs. No. And I've talked before about the fact that sometimes these needs assessments are done too quickly or done through a very narrow lens. No, so if I think there's funding, or I have funding for a particular intervention, that, let's say, nutrition, right? Because I think there's a nutrition crisis, then perhaps my needs assessment team will be just looking at nutrition, right? Looking for malnutrition, looking for evidence of a nutritional crisis, okay? Or maybe an agency specialized in WASH will be looking through the lens of, okay, is there a problem with water? Is there a problem with sanitation, etc., right? And each will go off, most likely, and do their individual needs assessments. There's the theory, right? So in theory, this problem of like each NGO or agency looking through its own lens or with its own mandate or whatever was supposed to be kind of rectified by the cluster coordination system, right? And I don't know how that's working now, to be honest. Yeah, the last time I didn't it didn't seem to be working very well, no, because the clusters seem to be set up also by kind of segmented, right? So you have the WASH cluster, the logistic cluster, I don't know, right? They seem to be also segmented. But when you think about people, right? If you even if you look at your own situation or situations of your family and friends, and you ask yourself, okay, what are my needs? Imagine if you started to try to assess your own needs. Try, and good luck with that, right? Because it's not that easy, right? And then when you, or maybe it is, maybe you know how to do that, how to assess your needs, right? Because what are needs at the end of the day, right? I might think that my greatest need at the moment is to go and have a big fat ice cream, right? Okay. Or maybe I need to watch a particular series, or maybe I need to take my medication for COVID or whatever, yeah? But I mean, when you think about it, people are like complex entities, right? So we have problems, we have situations we need to deal with, and then we have our needs, we have our wants, right? But to kind of think that we can actually go into a place with hundreds of thousands of people sometimes and assess their needs like as if they were some sort of abstract thing disconnected from the individual or the groups of individuals is kind of like a fairy tale fantasy, right? We can't do that, right? I don't think so. And I'm not so sure that looking at humanitarian situations through the lens of needs is the best way to do it, okay? Because when I try experiment on myself, and I think we should experiment on myself, I find it very difficult, right, to distinguish between needs or and problems, or to even kind of figure out what is the cause of my problems or my needs, right? Because there's so many things and people in my life that have a bearing and influence on my needs, my wants, and my situation, right? So I think that before, when things like if you read Refugee Health, or you look at things through the top 10 priorities, that could be very useful. as a guide, right? And I think we need to think of these things as guides, right? Rather than rules, right? Because humanitarian interventions are supposed to happen when a crisis happens, or an adverse event that is sufficiently large to have an altering effect, right? A change effect on people's lives, right? So I think we need to keep this kind of present, right? And then from this crisis, there will be a change in their lives for the worse, is the assumption, right? So a crisis happens, and then people's lives are impacted negatively, adversely, right, by this crisis. So before we start running off into needs assessment that we do, I think we need to step back and understand the crisis itself. Okay, so if we have, because what we do is we assess the needs first, right? But wouldn't it be more logical to kind of assess, okay, what has happened? What has happened, right? What is the crisis? What has caused the crisis? What was the situation before? What has the crisis changed, or what is the crisis changing? And what phase of the crisis are we in? Are we in the initial phase? Are we in the acute phase? Are we in the post phase? Are we in a kind of a constant crisis that is kind of, a low grade crisis? What is happening with the crisis? Yeah? Or is this the situation that's always been, and for some reason something has happened that has just made it worse, right? So there are crises that happen suddenly, and there are crises that happen gradually, right? Often the ones that happen suddenly are kind of or natural disasters, obviously, or armed conflict that ignites or escalates or lands on a particular location or population. And then you have the slower burn ones, which are people living already in kind of really bad situations, and then for whatever reason, lack of rain or extreme climatic conditions or price rises or price shortages, it pushes the situation past its tipping point, let's say, and people slide into a worsening situation. No, I think that we cannot analyze needs as a first starting point. We have to analyze the crisis and what it's changing, right? And then we need to focus on what are the ways, if I understand how the crisis is kind of interacting with the people, right? Because again, when you analyze a crisis, the crisis isn't like happening on its own, right? It's all happening contextually. Okay, so if you're looking at a specific population during a crisis, there's an evolution always, right? There's a starting point, there's a middle point, there's an ending point, and we have to figure out which point we're at and how the context, the people, and the crisis are all interreacting, right? What is happening to the people, to their circumstances? Okay, so I think that understanding needs is difficult. I think it's mission impossible. Understanding a crisis and how it's affecting people and the problems that it's generating for them, the challenges they're having to face that they didn't have to face before, or they did have to face them but they were not so acute. That is how we should approach first. That's much more difficult, obviously, than zooming off in my Land Cruiser with my checklists and going around or doing surveys. I'm not saying doing surveys is easy. Nutritional surveys are very difficult, and most times they're not done unless there's a rampant crisis. Yeah, but trying to assess mortality and all of these things is very difficult, it's expensive, and it's always subject to questioning. But if we could step back and try to understand, not unilaterally and we'll talk a little about this in a minute, by also asking the people who are living the crisis, who are being affected by the crisis, what is happening to them, right? And then trying to ascertain that.